Hello everyone. Since this is either a highlight, a standalone book, or the first episode in a series, I'm jumping in to remind you what the rules are for this podcast. First rule is, no real people stories. That means that any details from our own lives are merely anecdotal, we do not read books about real people, and we are not reading historical fiction. The second rule is that we are basing our analyses off of how the author treats characters and what they put them through. We are not judging the accuracy of the trauma, the accuracy of any actual conditions that may be portrayed, nor the authenticity of a character's reaction to that trauma or that particular condition. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The hosts are not trained professionals, and their opinions come solely from personal experience. In this episode, we discuss fictional depictions of trauma and violence that may not be suitable for all audiences. Please take care of yourselves. Specific content warnings for each episode can be found in the show notes. Events in the media are discussed in approximate order of escalation. This episode contains spoilers.
Nicole.
And I'm Robin, and this fortnight on Books That Burn, we are discussing Graceling by Kristin Cashore, the first book of the Graceling series. For our factions, we have Katza, Poe, Bitterblue, and Lek. And our first topic is gaslighting. This will spoil a major twist of the book. If you do not want that major twist spoiled, definitely don't listen to this section.
And for clarity, we don't usually talk about spoilers unless it changes your rereading of it the second time. This is one of those.
Yep, for sure. So, now that you know that you have accepted the possibility of spoilers, we are talking about Lek and gaslighting, because his power is to magically gaslight people, basically. Like, whatever he says, people believe it to be true. That's what his grace is. Grace is the term for in the books for special powers or whatever. Gracelings are people with the powers. And his grace is so powerful that it affects just the people who hear what he says, and then they say the thing that he said. And like, it keeps going. It has like knock-on effects. And it's, you know, a magically charged version of like a thing that happens, where in real life it happens with like only showing your bad side to like a smaller group of people and then being like super great and super nice to everybody else. And kind of the way that a tendency with narcissists is to charm everybody but their victims, which makes it harder for the victims to like get any help.
But we want to
just as a general
depiction in the book. So
right. But so like he's doing like that, but just magically supercharged.
He's not, well, this is why I'm saying we should narrow in on what's in the book. He's not quite doing that. He's actually not doing that. His doesn't work that way. The way his works is things that he says, people believe. And if you repeat things that he has said, you will also believe that it is true. Which is very different. And I think a big thing that makes his very scary is that, like, this is somebody who canonically, is incredibly cruel. We have evidence to believe that, like, he tortures animals and he tortures children and he tortures other people. And we'll get into like that in a later section. But he has a reputation throughout everywhere in all 5 kingdoms of being incredibly kind and benevolent to those groups because he has stated that he is. And they believe him because his power makes them believe, essentially.
Brief content warning for harm to animals. There's he has this reputation of being like super, super kind to just all of these animals that have cuts on their backs. Just so many animals. He just,
these
takes
animals
care
with
of
the
them.
same injury. He's so nice to them. Like, okay,
right.
well, why are they there? Nobody cares.
Why are there a bunch of animals all injured in this very similar way?
And only around his palace and only in his charge and only where he can get at them. And yeah.
Right. And with his grace, it's hard to even like ask. That it's hard. It's so hard to get to step 2. And the only reason we even have characters who can get to step 2 is because of what one character's power is.
Yeah. We have one character who is immune, essentially.
Yeah. Well, yeah, not spoiling that in this section, but just, the only reason we as the audience are even able to just get that is because there's someone who isn't affected. And even then he murders someone in front of someone, and then it's like, oh no, what a horrible accident. And as soon as he says the words, what a horrible accident, or, whatever the exact text is, then our character's perspective changes to be, oh my goodness, what a horrible accident. I definitely just saw and was not a murder.
And it's an interesting depiction of this particular trauma because a lot of times for these characters, especially because it is so magically charged and it's not just things that he's saying, but it's backed up by magic that actually influences how you think and what you think. A lot of times it seems like, at least in book 1, that the trauma doesn't come when he is talking. The trauma comes when you realize, because of whatever is, helping you to understand that it is a lie and that it's not true. The trauma comes when you realize that you've been magically forced to believe this thing. And that's very particular to this book.
Yeah, because a lot of books that have some kind of mental coercion, they'll have something about how, like, you're true, whatever is inside, yelling and screaming or something.
Right.
This doesn't have that.
That does not happen here. There's no chance. There's no chance for these characters to go, oh, that's weird. Like, they don't even get that opportunity. And a lot of, and we're not going to talk about it in this book in particular, because this doesn't happen in book 1. It happens way more in like the rest of the series. But there's a lot of like the trauma and how it affected people coming out in later books, where they just kind of come out of it realizing how bad it was, and just it's suddenly harming them in ways that they weren't prepared for because they didn't even know what was happening in the first place. And it's such a visceral depiction, but it also, I think, allows the author to really describe the cognitive dissonance in a way that is incredibly visceral, which you can't always get in books with this topic. Like, we've talked before about how, like, with gaslighting in particular, you as an author, an author kind of has like 3 options, really, right? Option number 1 is that the reader and the character both believe the same things, and you as a reader are almost you're not really gaslit because you're not actually physically in the situation, but it gives you a sensation of being gaslit.
When you eventually find out.
Right. When you find out that it wasn't just a lie, because a lie is different from gaslighting, even though lying is part of gaslighting. But like, you as a reader get that, like, oh, that was happening the whole time. Like, that happens to you. That's choice 1. Choice 2 is that the reader knows what is happening and the character is being gaslit. Which I think tends to be the one where, like, we as a podcast tend to rule that this was handled with the most care, because it doesn't negate the trauma, but it doesn't drag the reader through that feeling. And then option 3 is that the character is not successfully gaslit and knows what is happening, and so does the reader. And like, it failed, basically, right? And this book is a very rare example of option 1 that doesn't feel traumatic to read. We as a reader, we don't have any clues. We are never given any more information than our point of view character has. But because of the nature of how it is done, we never get that feeling of like, oh, we were lied to, because the way that it is handled on screen it's all very much like backstory to what our main character knows and not things that they are necessarily being told without us in real time. So we get that sensation of like, oh, the little bit we've heard about this kingdom from the beginning of the book is that it's a very nice place and the king is so wonderful and oh my god, the story, it's great. And then the instant that we actually physically run into anything that has to do with that character, we are immediately told, no, this is magical gaslighting. Here you go. Here's what's actually happening. Here's the cognitive dissonance, and we're going to lay it out step by step. And it's such a rare example of like, it's actually fine to read, even without us having it spoiled for ourselves, essentially.
Yeah, because like, finding out that information you were given early in the book is incorrect or at the very least incomplete. That's one of my favorite ways for world building to happen. Because
yeah, that's just like, good story building. That's just good world building.
Yeah. Especially in a style where you get a lot of information up front to then have some of that information not quite be right or not quite be useful and have it affect the character that something was off with it. Yeah, I like that nearly as much as I like some of the other styles of handling background.
Especially like the information we are given, because we're not given like granular details. We're given like this very broad strokes positive impression, and that's really it. So there really isn't anything that we have been tricked about because we are being accurately told that the other kingdoms view this kingdom and this king very positively. That's what we are told, and that's not wrong. So again, we don't get the feeling, we don't get the sensation of being lied to, but we also 100% we're not given the truth.
Because like it is true that they all...
It's such a good handling of it. It's really well done.
Because it is true that they all view them positively. It's just that the reason for viewing positively is they're being magically gaslit, right. And it's not that they actually, kingdom, deserve that reputation.
The kingdom doesn't deserve it, but those people do believe it. Like, it's not a lie to say that they feel that way. And that's just it's such a different take.
Just all the evidence for why you ought to feel that way is blatant lies.
Or just missing, straight up missing. And missing very intentionally. Like, what is your evidence? And the characters who are being magically affected just kind of go, I don't know. I mean, it's just kind of good, right? And like, that's the point where the reader is kind of clued in. Like, oh, that's weird. It's so well handled. I have a very positive opinion of this book and the way it does that.
All right, we're gonna talk about Katza and coercion. We're also going to spoil what her grace actually is. So if you don't want that spoiler, please go to the wrap-up. That's kind of the theme of
That's almost a spoiler anyway, because the fact that her grace is wrong is so...
Yeah.
Anyways.
But anyway, there's not another way to handle that.
Yeah.
And so... she's told that her grace is death or killing, basically. And because the first time that she did something that absolutely had to be because of her grace and couldn't be because of something else, she killed someone. And she gets with the coercion because they think that it's death and they treat her like it's death or killing. You have her uncle, the king, saying, I'm the only person who won't kick you out for your grace. Like, no one wants you. No one wants a Graceling. No one's really your
friend. Like,
no one wants a girl who's a Graceling. No one wants a girl Graceling who kills people. And the fact that he's the one increasing how many people she's killed seems to somehow mysteriously not factor in. Is like, yeah, no one's gonna love you ever, so I need you to go break this guy's arms.
It's such of the like the variety of, if you're not useful to me, then I will kick you out and you'll be alone. And it's so effective when it's isolation is what it is. Just using her ability as I don't want to say evidence, because using her ability to isolate her.
Yes.
And the thing that I, again, like talking about things I really like about the author does, we find out eventually, like, that's not actually what her grace is. It just makes that easier with practice. It gives her some advantages in combat. Easier. But, like, the fact that we as a, like, Katza as a character, and also we as the audience, we kind of get some hints from the very beginning that, like, it's probably not that. Like, it's very clear that all characters believe that, but we are told, like, hey, there's probably something more happening here. And it's done in such a smooth way. It's just very well laid out. And then eventually we do find out that her grace is something else. And it's kind of like, aha. Like, and you have this moment in your reading of like, oh, good, wonderful, she'll be fine. And like, it's just really well laid out, really well done in a very clear and concise way that leaves you without you. It doesn't leave you feeling confused in any way.
Yeah, because you have something to work off that does seem consistent. And then when you eventually find out that it's something else, it's a better explanation that fits more pieces. So it doesn't invalidate any of the pieces that you already had. It's like, oh, that explains this thing she does, this thing she does, and this thing she does. It doesn't, like, remove... It has more explanatory power. As a good theory should. A good replacement theory should. Yeah, and, you know, they figure out, like, a pretty good word that encapsulates what it is that she does. And how... Because of this history of having been coerced, this affects her relationship / friendship with Poe. And I'm going to attempt to not spoil what his ability is, but in a world where people have abilities and there may or may not be some misdirection over exactly what the best label is for those abilities, there becomes a point where she has to, like, work through whether she's okay staying friends with him after feeling like he coerced her in the way that her uncle had. And he wasn't trying to coerce her, but, like, there's like this bit where she, you know, punches him because she's mad at her uncle, and he's like, I'm gonna let you sort those feelings out because
that's not how we want to be together. Please don't do this.
Fighting with someone you care about when you're angry is bad. And fighting when you're angry is, like, the in reaction general, of I'm angry, good. I want to punch someone. That's bad. Just, it's not good. And Poe says, you know, we need to not do that. And she's like, but I'm really angry and I want to punch you. And he's like, which is why we can't do
which
that
is why
right
we're not doing
now.
That right now. Like, please no.
Yeah, and so there's this, like, really tricky balance where she doesn't want to feel manipulated, but he also, for various reasons, is more emotionally deliberate, is what I would say. And so it's not that she has... This is not a portrayal of a woman being more emotional than a man. That's not what's happening. It's just that he has had some very good reasons to put more labels on what he's feeling in order to better parse it.
Yeah, he's just had more practice where he's had to know exactly what is happening than she has.
Right. And it's like it works out really well because, you know, when you're being friends with someone who spends way more time thinking about what they say and thinking about what you'll say or how you'll react in reaction to what they say, if you're in a conversation like that and you feel like they have an agenda, that can get very twisty very fast because it can feel like you're being manipulated towards some outcome. And he has that kind of deliberation, and it just the way that they talk through as characters, how that relates to the very blatant I make you murder people in exchange to get food and shelter coercion that is happening with her uncle. The book untangles that and it spends the time. Anyway, I really liked it. Practice her being more deliberate because, you know, it doesn't have to be that he's the only one thinking through stuff. And I don't know, it just seems like things get better for her as she's able to have more intentionality and be around someone who gives her the space to be more intentional rather than just pushing her buttons until she does what they want.
And she also does a lot of figuring out how to kind of control her vulnerability in the situation too. And I don't mean that in like a victim blamey, it's her job kind of way. I mean that in a like, for #spoilers here reasons, she actually has more control over his ability to affect her than she knows about at first. And like the knowledge that she is actually dictating that control gives her a lot of emotional space to heal. And she does it. She puts in the work, and she puts in the work on screen, which is also very, very cool and very good.
And in terms of the author setting it up, I'm so glad that like what could have been one person having manipulated her whole life and then another person stepping in to chip away at more of the damage. Like, that's not what it is. This is about someone where like it could have been this really, really toxic fit, and instead it's used to help the character heal, to help both of them. And it's really lovely. It's great. I mean, it's a book, and as far as I understand, a series where the arc is like kicking out and stopping abuse and then dealing with the wreckage afterwards. That's
very much so.
Yeah. And I like that. Like that's the arc of the story, and it's great. On to Bitter Blue and Death of Parent. Yeah, this is the person we had referred to earlier, where the parent, I should say, her mother, gets murdered, and then someone immediately asserts an alternate narrative. Where, yeah, I don't want to spoil more here, but that's what I was referencing. If you listened to section 1. Yeah, so she is shot in the back with an arrow. The mother is. And Bitter Blue had been hiding inside a tree because she and her mother had been fleeing. And she had to get told what happened when she, you know, had seen her mother probably just a couple of hours ago. But like by the time they located her, it had been several hours at least. And because of, again, stuff going on from topic 1, she's got to just trust that the people who tell her that her mother is dead aren't giving her
helping the
misinformation. Yeah, that they're not helping the murderer. They're not giving her misinformation. And she has this arc with, because of who killed her mother and why, there's this arc of like, she doesn't issues with trust, very specific issues with trusting men. And then, you know, brief note on aftercare. I really like how she gets to kind of undo some of that gendered terror within the space of this book, like as to the level of how it interacts, how she deals with men who aren't her abuser. It's really nice to see someone getting aftercare. I say someone, other people do too, but like this very like specific character, because this is a child. I should say that Bitter Blue is a kid.
I think 10. I think she's 10. We get some flashbacks of when she's 9, but she's 10 in the book.
But yeah, that's the general shape of it. I love the aftercare. It fits the rest of the book. It's, you know, done well, not distracting. There's enough of a time frame involved that it makes sense for her to be in a better headspace by the time she's around a bunch of men again. Because, like, you know, hey, they went through a very harsh survival adventure. Not sure what other points you wanted to say here.
I mean, the big details here are that she really loses. I mean, we're talking about the death of her parent. She loses her mom off screen for her. We see it. She doesn't. And, like, she knew it was a possibility. But she kind of just has to go from, like, escaping from her situation with her mom that she knows and trusts and actually, you know, cares about, to just going with these strangers who may or may not harm her. And it's not a lot more complicated than that. But it is, like, the biggest emotional, like, trauma that really happens in the book. And it's the one that has, like, the most lasting effects that we see that continue past the story in book one and, you know, things like that. Like, our other characters have some pretty big traumas they have to work through. But as far as, like, point of view on screen characters, Bitter Blue has the most and is the youngest and has the most things that she has to kind of work through, and we know that she's not done by the time the book ends. Right.
Yeah, because there's a big difference between I no longer think every man is going to try to assault and or murder me. There's a big difference between that and being over the specific traumas that have already happened.
And there's also a big difference between part of my trauma and overcoming my trauma is just taking control of my life. And my trauma will never be over until everybody else is healed too. And, like, Katza doesn't need other people to heal for her to be fine. Bitter Blue kind of does. And that makes those implications kind of spiral out even past what are under her control to heal for herself. And it's a lot.
Yeah.
But again, it's really well handled. And if it's the kind of thing where, like, if you read book one and you're like, man, that really hurts. I want Bitter Blue to heal. Like, keep reading. Like, this character does kind of get through it and work it out and feel better and, like, actually heal. Like, that does happen.
It's just
it just doesn't all happen in book one. So.
Yeah. But as for what is in book one, we get to see, you know, her getting like some,
starting those stages. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's evidence that that's happening, which was really good. And, you know, strangers show up and say, hey, your mom's dead. If you would like to not be dead,
come with
you need
me
to
if you
come
want
with
to
us.
live.
Yeah. I mean,
that.
There is a technically true but very misguided perspective where you could say that you know, they kidnapped her, because it's not like they gave her a ton of option about coming with or dying. But
yeah,
they
didn't.
Objectively speaking, they are taking her away from the guardian, but they're also rescuing her from an abusive guardian.
Rescue, kidnap, it's all in how much freedom you has, and she actually has the freedom, so
yeah. I don't know what they would have done if she'd said, no, I'd like to sit in my tree, please. Because if she thought that they were, if she thought they were actually lying or weren't, didn't have the allegiances they said they had,
right,
then she might have not gone with them. And I don't know if they would have said, well, we need to just take you. Because, I don't know. It's also not the first rescue / kidnapping of the book.
Hey Nerferders, my name is Case Aiken, and for over 2 years I've hosted my show, Another Pass, where I sit down with interesting guests to talk about movies that we find fascinating but flawed. Good movies, bad movies, doesn't matter. We find ways that they could have been improved. So if you ever thought that a sequel dropped the ball by forgetting about a plotline, that an epic could have been saved by introducing the director to an editor, or that a comedy didn't work hard enough to have some substance behind the laughs, then check out Another Pass podcast at certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
On to the wrap-up and ratings for our gratuity rating for Gaslighting. Okay, there are a couple of specific instances that I think are severe. I don't know if it averages out to moderate or if, given the large presence of gaslighting in the fabric of the story, that it is severe.
I think it is very severe for the characters.
I don't know how severe it is for the readers.
I don't know either. I want to say it is given so gently to the readers that it is not severe. But I think the character experience of it might push it into moderate. Yeah, I think moderate.
Okay, let's say moderate, and there's a high chance that it'll read more like mild for any individual reader.
Yeah.
But we're going to err on the side of caution and say moderate. Okay. Next. Coercion.
I think severe? And I think what she's being coerced to do might even make it severe for the reader. Either moderate or severe, depending on your reader experience and like frustration with that particular trauma in books.
Especially when there's enough explicit description of the coercion going back to very young ages.
Yes.
Okay, so moderate.
Yeah.
Okay. And death of parent.
I mean, this is probably
I'd say
severe, maybe.
Yeah, it's either severe or moderate.
I think maybe severe because I think the way it's depicted, I don't think bothers us as much, but I think in general we should mark this as severe with the understanding that if you are listening to this episode or reading our transcript and you're like, that, and then you read the book and you're like, that's probably not that bad, like, this warning probably isn't for you then, because this is pretty bad if that's something that is really traumatizing to you. Or in general, if you feel probably kind of neutral about it, like, if it's something that will bother you at all, it will bother you in this book, I think is the way to mark this.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I have a, my sense of how graphic a parental death in a book is very skewed downwards. So yes, I will defer to your note that this is probably severe. Okay. Is it integral, interchangeable, or irrelevant? Gaslighting is the plot. It's like the point. I think the gaslighting and the coercion are integral.
Agree.
I could hear an argument for the death of parent being interchangeable, but I do think it's integral too.
I was actually going to say it might be irrelevant.
You think, for okay.
I think it's a lot
of
very colorful backstory for the character as they go.
But it didn't literally have to happen when it did.
I think they could have cut it out. I think that there was and I don't even want to say they could have cut it out and substitute it with other trauma. I think they could have just cut it out and just had the other trauma already displayed be the whole thing. Okay. I think it's very good world building. I think it's very good character building. But I don't think it was necessary, and I don't think something else had to swap in for it because it's just an addition to other trauma. It's not even the reason why this character is the way they are. It's just like the icing on the cake, basically.
That's a good point. But you do agree about the gaslighting and coercion being integral.
Those are integral. This one is just like let's be real. If this character's parent had just mysteriously never been in the book, would it have changed anything?
No. And given certain things, no one would have questioned them being around either. So, okay. All right. I will grant you, it's irrelevant. All right, then.
It's very good. It's just not necessary, and it's not something that needs to be traded for something else.
Yeah. There's enough other stuff. Treated with care. The gaslighting, like, yes. The coercion, yes. Death of parent, I think, yeah.
I think I want to...
Well, I mean, I think enough. I mean...
I think enough, yeah. I think
the
gaslighting and coercion are definitely yes. I think the death of parent is enough. I think the only thing that would have made it better is if it were literally completely off screen, but like... But then it wouldn't need to be there. And so,
the main traumatic thing about that death is the manner of death and not actually who died.
Right.
Right. And yeah. Like literally anyone dying that way in the book would be that same level of stuff for most readers. Okay. All right. So that was enough or that was yes for gaslighting, coercion, and enough for death of parent, or was it just yes?
It was enough for death of parent.
Okay, sounds good. For the point of view, for the trauma and aftermath, for it's Katz's point of view for the entire book. Trope spotter. For the trope spotter, the superpower lottery. You get a power, you get a power, you get a power. That's how the superpower lottery works. There's like powers and some people get them. Trope spotter is where we discuss a trope that is in the book and generally one that really matters to the book. And like that's the whole premise of Graceling, is that some people have these powers called the Graces, and some people, the people who have those powers, they have something that's visually distinct about them that tells everybody else that they have these powers. And the power doesn't seem to necessarily be linked to anything in particular. And there could be someone who had, like, the power to magically blow the best bubbles ever. It is a literal, just, like, randomized lottery. So, yeah. For favorite non-traumatic thing about the book. Do you already know yours?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think mine I don't know. Maybe I don't. You go first.
Okay. I mean, just in case this was yours, I didn't want to take it. Like, I really love this depiction of an Arrow Ace character.
That was not going to be mine.
Who ends up in a relationship because, like, it's done in a way that doesn't stop any of her arrowness or aceness.
She feels very Demi. It doesn't feel.
Yeah, it feels very Demi under the A-spec umbrella. We don't have this character using those specific terms, but she describes, like, generally speaking, being very Arrow Ace, and then this person feels like the one exception, and I'm like, and that's textbook Demi. Like, that's one way for that to look. So, yeah. And it's good because it doesn't, her being Demi doesn't stop her being A-spec, and, that's how it works, but
this is not a redemption, quote-unquote, story.
Not a redemption, story. Not fixing anything. The stuff that's getting fixed has nothing to do with that, and it's all just, like, literally, hey, can you trust another person ever? It's separate, and they have a lot of, like, really good, very specific language and discussion between the characters in a way that I am astonished is in a book from the early 2000s, frankly. And I'm very glad that it is. That's mine.
I think my favorite thing is how varied the cultures are. There's a lot of books where they'll tell you when they draw it out and they, like, sketch it out for you, they'll tell you that their cultures are different. And then when you are reading the book, all character interactions feel very the same. And then there's other books where they'll like explicitly say like, you know, I mean, people do different things, but we're all just kind of the same, and they kind of like hand wave it, and that's fine. But this book, like, and this is not the only book we've read that does a good job with this, but like this one, it kind of stands out to me because of how much the culture that they are in interplays into the story. The almost culture shock as a reader as you go from one kingdom to the next is very palpable, and it's very well done. Like, you know, as a reader, by reading a page, what kingdom are they in? If you were told, here are the kingdoms, here's how they work, here are the ones that they will enter in the book, you can choose a page that has other character interactions, read the interaction, and guess, and probably be right.
Yeah.
It's very nice.
I wish the setting for, like, the kingdom they start in were, like, a little bit more specifically called out, because it feels a little bit like, all right, so you know this is a ripoff of European medieval fantasy. We don't need to describe much. And then we go to, like, Poe's kingdom, and it's like, all right, let me tell you about this place, because clearly you haven't seen anything like this before.
Well, but that is how people tend to treat their own... Like, I would actually argue that that's not what's happening. I would argue that we are going from Katz's kingdom that she doesn't think needs explaining because it's hers to a place that is foreign to her.
Sure.
Because none of the kingdoms, none of the ones in this book could you look at and say, well, you are absolutely not European medieval fantasy. Like, all of them are, but the ones that get described are the ones that are new to our main character. It's not that, like, hers is somehow more of that archetype than any of the others. It's just that we're reading her point of view. So, like, she doesn't explain the ins and outs of, like, the thing that is intimately familiar to her, because it's just how life is, and that's just the life she knows. But when we go to somewhere that is new to her, we get, like,
yeah,
her
and if she did, I'd probably be like, why are you telling me how hearths work? Okay, no, I see your point.
Yeah, like, that would be weird. It'd be weird if someone walked into my house, I'm not going to say, okay, so in America, here's how we construct doors. And usually it's a good idea in a place that you did not, like, oversee the construction of, to replace the screws on the latch of your front door with longer screws to make it so that you can't just kick it open if someone is trying to get into your house. Like, that's not a detail that I'm going to give you. But if I'm going with somebody from America to a different place, or even a friend coming from a different country and we are going somewhere that neither of us has been before, we might comment like, oh man, ceilings are so low here. Like, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it would feel really weird if somebody walks into my house and I'm like, okay, so I know traditionally Americans on TV are depicted with fireplaces. However, like, that doesn't track. Like, however, my home does not appear to have one. Like, that's not how people are. That's not how we share the details.
Nah, good point. I was just thinking about, like, what does and doesn't get treated as the default.
Well, I mean, it's Katz's home. Like, this is where, like, I think the single character versus, like, omniscient narrator perspective makes a big difference, because if we had, like, a third person narrator who is over here like, so Katz's home is clearly the default and everyone else is weird, like, that wouldn't make any sense. That would read really weirdly. Yeah, but if it's my house and I'm the one telling the story and I go like, so my you know, my dresser is cedar, and when I touch it, I can hear the faint cries of the loggers. Like, that makes no sense. But if you're being a really dramatic, omniscient narrator, you might include a really weird detail like that a character wouldn't actually think about, because it's interesting to the narrator, but that doesn't have anything to do with the character. But our characters are our voice, and they're not going around noticing things that are odd in their own home because it's not weird to them. It's just, that is how life is.
I don't know. I just want what Poe thinks about Katz's kingdom.
Oh, I would love a Poe. Well, this is the other thing too. Actually, Robin, I know you haven't read book 2 yet.
Yeah.
But like, in
that's
book 2,
the point of the more books.
But it is a little bit like in book 2, we definitely get what feels like our character looking at their kingdom and going, aha, well, this is weird because we're recovering from a trauma. But also, this seems normal to me. I guess I need to go look deeper. Like, you know, and like, we get that feel in a way where, from Katz's perspective, that kingdom felt very foreign. And I think it would be a little bit different because of like the connotations of the author's perspective. If one of these kingdoms was like clearly Asia and one of them was clearly Africa and one of them was clearly South America, but it's not like that. They're all vaguely white, well, not even white, actually. They're all kingdom structure-wise, vaguely white European fantasy, but the kingdoms are not white people, any of them. Mm-hmm. And, like...
yeah.
None of them feel like the archetype for something else.
True.
But again,
I guess it's not like I can
think
say,
it would be very different. I think it would be very different if it was like, you know, omniscient narrator treats cats' home as the default, but like, my home is my default. Like, I'm from America. I went to Sweden once. I don't remember very much of it. America's my default. If I went anywhere else, I would notice. I would notice differences. For that matter, America is so varied. If I go to the South, I feel a cultural difference. I would probably think about it very similarly to the way that Katza, like, describes other cultures because she's walking in somewhere that is not familiar to her. Like, that's how I feel about the American, like, Southern culture. Like, the couple of times I've been to Texas, I'm like, this is weird. I don't know how to act here. Things are slightly, like, buildings are not different because it's all the same kind of, like, everything that goes into them. But, like, it feels weird because it's not how I interact with my environment. It's not how the things that I'm familiar with interact with our environments. The people that I'm familiar with, it's not how we treat our environment. Like, it's just different.
Yeah. Anyway, I agree with you that the kingdoms are cool.
I think the way that they are depicted is very interesting, and I think it's. You should read book 2 and 3. Like, it is very funny to get, like, you know, Katza treats this place as like, ooh, odd, and then we get into the other character's head and they're like, home. It's very well done.
Good. All right. I think that brings this episode to a close. Thank you so much for joining us this fortnight, and we will catch you in another fortnight. All music used in this podcast was created by Nicole as Heartbeat Art Co. and is used with permission. Our transcriptionist is Heather. Follow her on Twitter at MamaDragon20. We're proud members of the Certain Point of View Network. Find all the CPOV shows at www.certainpov.com. You can contact us on Twitter at BooksThatBurn or by email at booksthatburn@yahoo.com. Please consider leaving us a tip at ko-fi.com/booksthatburn or becoming a monthly supporter on patreon.com/booksthatburn. All patrons get access to our upcoming book list, bonus content, including the second half of all interviews, and will receive a one-time shout-out. To get updates on our written reviews, recent episodes, and newly completed transcripts, subscribe to our fortnightly newsletter at buttondown.email/booksthatburn. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us a review wherever you're listening. This helps people to find the show. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks.